Here to talk to you about effective scientific presentations, or how to give a presentation. And I've given this talk to faculty, I've given it to undergrads, I've given it to grad students, all over the map. And so I'm assuming some of you are faculty, I see, and you're all grad students, right? Is that correct? There's no undergrads in here, right? Oh, okay, see, there's undergrads in here too. So if you're a graduate student, you're already given some talks, probably lower level. Faculty have given higher level talks. Undergrads may not have given any talks yet. So I'll try and cover everything. So my name's Adam Steinberg, and I know some of you, but I don't know all of you. And for 20 years, I worked in biochemistry, upstairs in the media center, doing whatever they wanted me to do, basically. I taught staff and students and faculty, as I just indicated, but I also did graphics, molecular graphics, the websites, whatever they needed. They would come to me and say, can you do this for me, interpret it, and do it. The best part about my job, or the part that I liked the most, was actually working with data. So someone would come up with an experiment, get a pile of data, bring it to me and say, I think I see this, or I think I see a trend here. Can you look at it visually and process it visually and see if you see the same thing? Or I have a model and I think I can make it do this. Can you visually figure that out and see in 3D if that will actually work, or if you can actually make that happen? And then I also have a business called Art for Science, where I do molecular graphics for books, which is what I do now because I no longer work for the university. The last two books that I just did was Leninger and Lodish, and I'm working on a bunch of other books right now. So if you open those books, you'll see a lot of my work in there. And there's some of my work in there. Some of the work that I did in those books is right there. What I like to ask is how much experience you guys have. And it's mainly for undergrads, to focus them on, have you ever done anything like this? Because they say, well, you know, I've never given a talk. I don't have any experience giving a talk. I don't know what I'm doing. I get nervous. I get scared. I don't know what to do. And it's not really true because has anybody ever been in dance or theater or theatrics? Anybody? Yeah? A little bit maybe? Sports. Sports? That's performance. You're out on stage. You're out on a stage giving a performance. Even though you're with the rest of the team and you think you're hiding, people are looking at you. They're watching you. And it works, right? So does anybody use Keynote? One. Everybody else uses PowerPoint? Maybe two? Everybody else uses PowerPoint? Okay, so it's a difference that I wanted to know how to tell you how to do things. So typically when you go to a talk, a big talk, a little talk, any kind of talk where there's an invited speaker or you're the invited speaker, you see an introductory slide. And there's important information on that slide, but there's also information you never want to put on this slide. Other than Gary, how many people don't know they're in microbial sciences right now? Right? How many people don't know they're in room 2301? And how many people don't know you're here on October 13th with the Baxter Institute? So people put this on their slides all the time, and it's ridiculous. You all know that in the audience. The speaker doesn't know that because they're the invited speaker and they're coming here, and so that's why they do it. But what I'm telling you is don't do it. There's only two things that people, maybe three things that people want to know when they walk in the room. What are you talking about? Who are you and where are you from? And that's it. That's all that's important. Let me say also that feel free to ask questions at any time. Okay? Make it interactive as you want. If you disagree or you have a different opinion, please just let me know. Yes?
So, you know, in regards to not putting like the date of a talk on there.
Yeah.
From an audience perspective, to me that says, well, this could just be some general talk that's been reused over and over again.
And sometimes
by putting the date, you're saying, hey, no, I took the time for this specific talk for you, the audience, today.
Yeah. So I've prepared thousands of talks for faculty and grad students and just all over the map. And generally what happens is, yes, they make a customized talk for that specific time, but it's an amalgamation of all their other talks where they pulled things together and they don't really fit well. So yes, they did take some time to make it for you, but in general, they didn't take as much time as they should have taken to make it for you. So I still think that the date is irrelevant. Everybody knows what that they're there for. So a nice, clean introductory slide is a good way to start. A bad way to start is to pick fonts that people can't read. And I picked the most egregious font I could find in the palette so that you could not read it on purpose to make the point. But there are a lot of fonts that are very hard to understand, very hard to read. So try to stick to very clean, open fonts. Did you have a question?
What's that one called?
That's Brush Script. Obviously not one to use. I actually like the way this slide looks, and a lot of other people like the way this slide looks, but it's very wrong. Never use all caps. It's very hard to read, very hard to understand all caps. So avoid using that. Another thing that people do is they put a first cap on every word. That's also wrong. The psychology behind how you interface with things is you're taught from an early age that sentences have a first cap and that's it. And a title slide, it's not going to really matter, but the titles on all of your slides are there for a purpose. You put a title on a slide for the people who are talking to them next to the person next to them, for the person who's writing a note. So the person in the audience who's not paying attention at the time, they're going to look back up and say, where did you go on your talk? Where are you at right now? They're going to read the title of your slide and figure out where you're at and catch up to you. So you want to make those titles as easy to understand as possible. So very clean, very simple. I mean, make it interesting, right? It's more interesting to look at this than just a white slide with a blue box in the middle. But it's not necessary. It doesn't have to be beautiful and graphically oriented. It's up to you. I put this together a couple years ago to help people put together talks, and I'm giving it to you now so that when you put together your next talk, you can just follow the bullet points. You can just follow right down the list and say, did I do number 1? Did I do number 2? Did I do number 3? Did I do number 4? If you follow these things and do all these things, your talk will be fine. You won't have any trouble giving a talk. It'll come off just beautiful. This brings up the point of outlines. When people, I mean, this outline is way too detailed. You would never show this in a talk. But what a lot of people do is they put up 3 points, and they say, today, I'm going to talk to you about 3 points. And there's a 1, 2, 3. And that's basically the outline of their talk. And that's not a bad way to do things. There are people who don't like that in the audience and people who do like it. But it doesn't matter so much what they like or dislike. It's how you can functionally give your talk. So if you like an outline up there, don't be too rigid in it. Keep it very simple, but put your outline up there in a very simple way. So the first thing on that sheet is know your audience. So again, this is an egregious, I would never do this. I picked something that was over the top to make the point. I would never give you a talk to an English-speaking audience in a foreign language. Right? That's not knowing the audience who's there. You need to know what the audience knows. You need to try and figure out what the audience knows and try to help them. Try to help them understand what you're trying to talk about up here. So let's do a real example here. So this is what I want to talk to you about today. I'm going to come here and give you a talk on this. And I'm just going to launch right in and start talking about this. And you guys are going to be lost because does anybody know what that is? These are bacteria. Does that help? This thing eats bacteria. No, it's actually a nematode, right? So if I would just come here and start talking about this and start talking about male nematodes and go on and on about C. elegans, you'd be like, what is he talking about? Who is that? I need to bring you up to speed. I need to give you some background information. I need to say, these are C. elegans. They're little worms that live in the soil. They're a research animal that we do basic research on to find blah, 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 blah. They're a hermaphroditic species, which means there's no male, there's no female. Okay? What I want to talk to you about today is male C. elegans. Well, if there's no males, how can I talk to you about males, right? It's a very complex subject. Well, if you do certain things to these worms, they become males, or they become females. And there's good reason for that, and today I will blah, blah, blah tell you about that. Here's males, there's females. And then once I get you up to speed, then I can come to this slide and say, okay, males have apparatus that grab onto females and just hold them in place so they can mate continuously. And so this is a grabber end for males. So you need to bring the audience up to speed. You need to know what level of knowledge the audience has, give everybody in the audience the same background, and then launch into your topic. Yes?
How do you decide what level of knowledge
Well, so that's the first thing I asked you, right? I asked how many are undergrads, how many are grads, and how many are faculty. And if this was a big talk, right, if I was giving a big talk, I would contact the people who are there, where I'm going, and say, who's in the audience, right? Who am I talking to? Who am I speaking with? So that I would get their understanding, especially on a scientific topic. If you're going to a symposium about C. elegans, you can assume that they better know a lot about C. elegans. They know there's males, and they know you're going to give them a little bit of background information, but you're going to launch right into this pretty quickly. If you're talking to undergrads who've never seen a C. elegans, you're going to give them a lot of background. So you have to gauge that. Okay, the second thing on that piece of paper is to tell a story. If I stand up here and give you a bunch of random facts, you're going to fall asleep. If I stand up here and I tell you a story with a nice beginning and introduction, give you a nice plot line in the middle and conclude it at the end, you're going to be very fascinated, hopefully, with my research that I'm talking about. I mean, this is a methods talk on how to give a talk, so it's a little weird. I'm not giving a talk on a topic. But when you do it, you'll be giving it on a specific piece of research. And so if you tell a story, you'll captivate your audience and keep them going with you. When you do posters, a lot of people don't get this right away either, is you need to have a story in your poster too. There should be an introduction, there should be the middle parts, and then there should be a conclusion. And it makes perfect sense, but when you look at people's posters that they have done, they're not telling a story. Yes?
So, yeah, I've kind of grappled with this idea of stories in science for a couple years. And I first heard it like my first semester of grad school. And so do you think the scientific story, I mean, is the essence of that all, that there's just a beginning, a middle, and an end? I mean, is that all that the scientific story means?
That's not what I'm trying to get across. The point I'm trying to get across is I have information in me that I need to give to you. And in order to do that, I need to have your attention and keep you captivated. Because if you're falling asleep, then I'm not getting my point across. So if I follow storytelling procedures that in a novel or a book would follow, that I know work, then I can make up a beginning, a middle, and an end. I can pick a middle, a beginning, and an end. It's arbitrary as long as I can communicate with you. It's just a communication tool. That's all it is. So you don't want to start with Newton, right, in the 16th century, but you also don't want to start with yesterday. You have to decide where the beginning was and where the middle is and where the end. And it's going to change depending on your talks. 3 parts to every story, as I already went over, right? So now here's an outline. Today I'm going to talk to you about, it's weird giving this talk because half the time I'm giving the talk and half the time I'm telling you how to give a talk. It's kind of odd. What people do, and I'm sure you've all seen this, is they bring up everything I'm going to talk about today, but they highlight what I'm talking about right now. And the very nice thing about this is you guys are smart. And some of you are going to process this information much faster than I can go through it. So I want to give it to you so the people who are smart and can process information quickly don't fall asleep. Right? I'm not losing their attention span because all their information they want is on here. They know where I'm going to go. The people who aren't as fast, they're going to stick with me right there at the first part. They're going to ignore the rest. So it's perfectly okay if your audience gets ahead of you. They'll catch up later. Or they'll keep themselves busy. So I already talked about giving the audience the same basic knowledge when you walk in the room. And then the next most important thing you want to do at the beginning of your talk is say, why is this important? So this research I'm telling you about today is so good because, it's so fascinating because we discovered this and it's so whatever it is, right? Because if it's not interesting, if you don't tell me why I'm supposed to be paying attention, I'm probably not going to pay attention. Then you want to organize everything. To me, this stuff, when I wrote this up, this whole talk, it seemed so easy. It seems so simple, but it's not. And you now have the piece of paper in front of you that you can follow, but without that, I had people coming to me all the time saying, well, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to say. I don't know when to say it and all that. So it seems a little bit trite when I go through this stuff sometimes. But you want to organize everything. You also want to personalize everything. It's not, I did everything in the lab, right? It's our lab did this. These people in my lab helped me do this. Together, we had this project come together. You want to include everybody who was on the project, but you don't want to say, in the field, this is what happens. That's not as interesting. right? We interact by making a personal connection to the speaker and the person in the audience. And so when you say, I did this, or we did this, or the person in my lab that I work with very closely did this, and there's a picture of them right here, then they can make an identification with that work, and you'll gain their interest. And then you build up your points logically in order, which seems obvious. So when you start a talk, I don't recommend starting on the computer. I recommend starting with a piece of paper. So you take a piece of paper out and you write down what I want to accomplish, right? I have this piece of research. I know that this is a key piece, but I can't just walk in the room and say that, right? I have to bring everybody up to speed, so I need some information before that. What am I going to tell them? And then I need to conclude it afterwards. What am I going to tell them? So start breaking it up. Then you start making slides, and then this is the slide sorter out of PowerPoint. You start moving those slides around like a puzzle and get them in the right order. Give a little bit of practice. Go, oh, that's way not right. I got to move this over here, change this over here. So use this as an organizational tool. Third thing is the conclusions. Again, if you don't personalize your conclusions, I mean, the audience wants to know what you think about the field. So I'm giving you a talk on science. I'm standing up here because I'm the expert, not because I'm the expert, but because for this 15 minutes of fame, I am the expert. My name is on the piece of paper. It's in the symposium order, or I was invited to give this talk. So I become the expert as long as I'm standing up here. So those people in the audience want to know what your opinion is. So when you give your conclusions, you say, I think it's this way. And then at the end, they can challenge those conclusions with questions. But if you just ramble off facts, you're going to lose everybody. So personalize whatever you can. And then again, keep it simple. And of course, your future research, which is very important. I would say most people in the audience want to know where you're going with your project. And a lot of people just leave this off. And when you have 15 minutes, it's hard to get everything in. So of course you leave something off. But it's always, you listen to this great research and then you're like, well, where could that be applied or where could that go? And so you want the expert's opinion, the person who's standing up here, where they think they're going to go next. So always try to include that. When you make your slides and when you do this kind of thing, you need to be consistent. And this is a big mistake that a lot of people make. So on my first slide, I'm going to talk about gene 1, blah, 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 and it's going to be purple. I'm going to show it to you purple. But then on my second slide, I'm going to change it to green. And I didn't do it on purpose, I just did it. That's the way my slides are, especially if I put a bunch of talks together. So in the audience, I'm talking about this stuff, and the audience is saying, well, that was purple before, and now it's green. Is he talking about the same thing or not? I mean, if you pick a color scheme, stick to it. So you need to change your slides so they all match. It's also true of orientations. So whether you're working on specimens or 3D molecular graphics or something, if you show it a certain way over and over and over again, and then suddenly you flip it, then the audience, so these are C. elegans, they have a head and a tail, or a pharynx and a tail. And then suddenly in this fourth slide, I suddenly flip it, and so the tail's over there, and I start talking about the head. You're all looking at that end, because I've set that up, when really it's at the other end. So don't flip things around, unless you tell us. Right? You can change colors if you tell us. You can say, in slide 2, I've changed this color to green because I needed to blah, blah, blah. Right? So as long as you let the audience in on it, it's okay. Be honest and give credit. I've been to a lot of high-level talks. I've worked with a lot of faculty, and I hear the faculty come back and say, he talked about my work. I was sitting right there in the front row, and he didn't even mention my name. Don't do it. The people you're giving your talks to are your peers. Right? You need to work with them in the future. When you need a reagent or something, and you didn't mention so-and-so's work, and then you say, can I have that reagent? They're going to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have any of that reagent. Why would I help you? Right? If you're using someone else's work, give them credit. And I think that that's perfectly simple, easy to do, but apparently it's not, because I hear a lot of complaints that people don't do it. So make sure you do it. Always be honest, and the reason you want to be honest is these people know what you're talking about, and they're incredibly smart. So when you're giving a talk, a big talk, to a large group of people who are your peers, you never want to stray too far away from what you exactly know for sure. because they are going to quiz you hard. When you're talking to them in the hallway, talking to them at lunch, then you can stray further away from what you know. But in this auditorium, you're better off sticking to exactly what you know, not speculation. Oh, I need my laser pointer for this one. I'm not a fan of laser pointers. So a lot of people, and I know you've seen this, they come up and they say, this is some text that I want you to understand. But guess what? You can't read and comprehend all of this text and still listen to what I am saying. So why do you think you need to put all of this text up here? I can't even read it. We call these kinds of slides book slides. When people come to a lecture, they come to hear you and see you, not read slides with you. But you see these kind of slides all the time. And what's worse yet is there's a podium here, and the person is standing here going like this. Let's read this together. This is some text that it doesn't work. There's no reason to have this text on the screen. None. I mean, you're going to practice your talk. It's your research. You know what you're talking about. So there's no reason to do this kind of thing. Use as few words as possible. So here's a slide out of one of my talks about images. Okay? And I can tell you in words what's going on. I can say, you know, images appeal to our subconscious. I mean, I can say it doesn't mean anything, right? It's just a bunch of words. But if I show you a picture that means that stuff, then I know that, why do I need these words over here? You can see what's going on in here, right? This is altering your subconscious. You're connecting with this on your subconscious. You feel that in your gut. You feel how weird you feel. You feel it in your head. You feel weird looking at this picture. It's like, it's unnerving. So if I alter reality and you don't recognize it, your subconscious says, well, people don't have two sets of eyes and two sets of mouths, and I don't feel comfortable, and I feel weird. And so what if I just leave the picture up there, right? Now, I don't have any words to confuse or talk about. I can say that. You can figure it out from looking at the picture. The words are not necessary. The words actually are only there to help you figure out what's going on, right? It's there to remind you what's going on. And I know top-level people, top-level faculty who give top-level talks, and they have cheat sheets in front of them. They have pieces of paper in front of them. And it says slide 14, 3 points, because they want to make sure they say those 3 things on there. Because on slide 14, those points aren't on that slide. They're on that piece of paper. But you don't know that. They know that. Use notes all you want. That's great. Use whatever you need. I got to get rid of this, sorry. It drives me nuts. I don't have to look at it either. Here's Keynote, and here's a note in Keynote that tells me what I'm supposed to say on this slide. Right? It says images appeal to our subconscious. All my stuff I need to say is right there. You don't see it, but I do. These are presenter tools. They're in PowerPoint and they're in Keynote and everything else. So, but minimize the words on the screen as much as possible. If you're doing an experiment or you need to show a timeline, of course there's words on the screen. Of course you have to have stuff up there. Use it when you need it, but if you can minimize it, get rid of it. The next thing that people ask me all the time is, what size text do I use? And my answer is always, I don't know, whatever you want to use. So obviously 12 points not going to work, right? You can go too small, that's not going to work. If you really want to make a big point, you're going to use some big text. That's okay. If you want to capture the audience, use some big text. 36, 44, somewhere in there. What I was always taught was, if you take your slide and print it off and put it on the floor, and you can read it looking at it this way, then you're done. It's good. If you can't read it doing this, then it's not good.
So short people need small text.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so far away, it looks like, wait a minute. But the details do matter. So, another detail that matters a lot is PowerPoint. Because you all said, all of you but 2 said you use PowerPoint. PowerPoint by default gives you bullet points for almost everything. So there's 2 points here. And this has 1 point underneath it, and this has 2 points underneath it. I would argue you don't need bullets on any of that because it's indented and no one's going to get lost. They know there's 2 points there. They know it's just turn off the bullet points. An itemized list is 1, 2, 3. Who's going to get lost on a 1, 2, 3? Why do you need bullet points on an itemized list? It's ridiculous. what a lot of people do is they get this list like this, and then they say, well, I can't understand it, it's too hard to read, and so they put spaces in between it. And spaces are great, but if you put spaces in it, then you definitely don't need bullet points, because you have spaces to say there's 3 points going on. So, simple. Here's a slide I took from somebody else at a talk I was at. And I didn't take it because it had bullets, non-bulleted bullet list, but it does, and it works very well. You can tell exactly what's going on. I took it because it was blue background and gray background, and I wanted to talk to you about blue background and gray background. We just had the Steinberg Symposium here this summer. Nobel laureates, Lasker Award recipients, big name people came. Most of them talked with a blue to black background slides. It's like, that's been dead since the year 2000. 10 years ago this died, and people are still using it. So when PowerPoint first came out, this was the default. Yellow text, yellow titles, white text with a blue to black background slide. And it was designed for business people. And Redmond, the programmers in Redmond who work for Microsoft said, let's make it jazzy. Let's sell it to business professionals. And they did, but scientists picked it up and said, wow, we can use this too. Only it doesn't work for scientists when it's like this. Because scientists like to show color. And they like to show images. Business people don't have a lot of that stuff. So when you try to use these colored backgrounds, it competes directly with the data that you're trying to show people. I would argue that you really, really, really want to just use a white background. Focus people's attention on what you want to talk about, not the background, or not competing between the background and the foreground. In this room, you could never use black background slides, but a lot of rooms you can, and a lot of people do. And it works also. In this room, it's very gray, but in a dark room, it would work fine. When you use black background, you got to make sure these colors are all the way up. See the change between that? Dark, all the way up. So if you want to use a dark background, you got to have a lot of contrast. So your colors need to be very bright. Color is really powerful, right? I don't have to tell you to look at the top of the screen. You all look at the top of the screen because there's a little color up there, and the title's up there, and the rest is all dark. Use it to direct people's focus. Don't use it incorrectly. I've seen slides like this, student slides. I've seen faculty talking to students, trying to keep them awake using slides like this. And it just doesn't work. There's color combinations that just don't work at all. White, or yellow on white never works, okay? Green on white never works. Don't use those. If you need to use yellow, or you need to use green, or you really want to, make sure you have a black outline around this. And then they'll work just fine. Or put them on a black background. Okay, next thing on the list is practice, practice, practice. There's two groups that you want to practice with. One is the people in your lab, obviously, the people who know what you're talking about, the scientists around you. And the other is people who don't know what you're talking about. So wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, mothers, sisters, people you meet on the street, whoever you can get to listen to you. And the reason you want those two groups to talk to is the people who know what you're talking about, the scientists around you, they'll say, oh, you missed that on that slide. Or that slide's not quite right, you need to change that. They aren't looking at you, they're looking at that. Whereas the people who don't know science, they couldn't care less what's going on up there. They're looking 100% at you. And so they say, do you know you were jingling your keys the whole time and it was annoying? Would you stop doing that? Did you know you were like rubbing your nose or scratching your neck the whole talk? It's driving people nuts. Don't do that. Because they're not paying attention to the screen. They're paying attention to you. So it's very beneficial to talk to both groups. The other way to do it is to be recorded, like Robin's doing today, and then watch your recording. As painful as it is, watch your own recording. You'll see all kinds of things you're going to stop doing. And the next time you give a talk, you'll be much better when you're recorded. You never want to memorize your talk, ever. I've given this talk 100 times. I try to give it differently every time. If I memorize this talk, you'll fall asleep. Because then I'm just giving you a bunch of boring facts. I'm not animating it. Okay? Never memorize. You never want to read. I saw a grad student one time give a talk very close to the podium, gave a very nice talk. And then afterwards, I went up to talk to him, and I looked at the screen, and it was all notes. So he actually read off everything he said, but he was very good at it. And I will guarantee you, you guys are not going to be very good at it. I don't know how he did it still today. He was really good. So never read, because that comes across very bad, and then use notes. I showed you one note. Here's another note. This is what a note looks like in Keynote. At the beginning, I asked you, have you ever been in drama, theater, dance, debate, sports, lab group? How many use PowerPoint? How many use Keynote? See, I had a note for that, telling me what to ask you. Even though you saw blankness, I saw exactly what I needed to. So notes are very handy, very good thing to use. And then that's what it looks like in Keynote. It also tells you the time that you've been talking. So right now I've been talking for 30 minutes, which obviously you won't see in that. But, and there's a note, a very small note. And here's PowerPoint. So here's a note in PowerPoint. That's what the grad student used at one time. He had this very large, and the slides very small, and he just read it right off. He was good. The nice thing about PowerPoint, too, is it shows you the slide you're talking right here in blue, the next two slides coming up, and the previous slide. Somewhere it tells you how long you've been talking, too. I must have cut it off. But use these presenter tools all the time. Delivery. I mean, this stuff is obvious. When people communicate, when I communicate with you or you talk to somebody in the hallway, this is what you communicate with, right? So if your hands are in your pockets, you're not communicating. It's not working. People talk with their hands, and they should talk. Your hands should be animated. It was heavy, right? It was big. It was very small. We did it very fast. You know, it's body language. You know it. When I stand up here, you can tell if I'm standing on one leg or two. You know right now by looking at my hips if I'm standing on one or two. You look at the corners of my mouth, you look at the corner of my eyes, you look to see if I'm tilting my head. All of that stuff is communication. And that's what you pick up on, the person standing up here. If I'm monotone and I'm standing at a podium and I'm not animated at all, you're going to fall asleep. Walking around and interacting is the best way to communicate. Using your hands is the best way to communicate. It's very hard to do with a laser pointer in your hands. And you never want to talk to the screen, obviously. Even with a mic, you want to talk to the audience. Eye contact, that's a lot of people have trouble with eye contact. The really nice trick to learn, I mean, this audience is small, it's very simple, is to find, you have a big audience, like downstairs, 300 people sitting there. Find someone over here who's animated and giving you good feedback, smiling at you, nodding their head, like Madeline's doing to me over here. And then find someone doing the same thing over there. And then you have a talk with those two people, okay? You slowly talk to this, you talk to this person, and then you slowly pan over and talk to that person. And everyone in the middle thinks you're talking to them, when you're really only talking to those two people. Your nervousness level goes way down, and it becomes much easier to talk. Eye contact is really good, of course, and I talked about facial expressions. How many times have you gone to a lecture and they say, I'm sorry, I'm not prepared, I'm sorry, it's broken, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. There's no sorries. Never a sorry. If you walk in and there's technical difficulties, you say, there's technical difficulties, I'm going to fix it as soon as I can, and then I'll get on with my talk. There's no, if you're sorry you didn't prepare, then you shouldn't be giving a talk. There's no I'm sorry's, there's no apologies. In the Ebling Center, we were in the middle of a talk and the lights went out, power shut off. He kept giving his talk. He didn't say, I'm sorry, the lights are out, I got to stop. He just kept talking. It was great. There's no reason to stop. Hands versus pointers versus lasers. So you need to become intimate with your stuff. And in a huge room where it's way up high, it's very difficult to use a pointer. But pointers are the best way to become intimate. Laser pointers are really bad for a couple of reasons. One is they show your nervousness, right? People forget to turn them off and they start winging them all around the room. That's bad. Never want to do that. I mean, here's my nervousness. It's not bad. You actually want to be nervous. You want to be nervous up here. It's a good thing to be nervous because it'll animate you. It will cause you to raise your voice and lower your voice. If you're not nervous, you're deadpan. And if you're deadpan, I don't want to listen to you. I want to interact with you. Most people are nervous for the first 30 seconds to 60 seconds. Their voice cracks, their throat is dry, and then they get off. their delivery comes out and they're perfectly fine the rest of the talk. Guess what? The audience totally forgets about the first minute or two. Couldn't care less that you're nervous as heck in the beginning. So don't feel bad that you're nervous in the beginning. These are also weapons. And don't use them as weapons. When you're done with them, you put them down. Same with laser pointers. You don't walk around. People do this all the time. People do this all the time. I'll use this end. They do this all the time. It's like, no, you don't hit the screen. There's no hitting the screen. Especially because screens move. And there's nothing more annoying than that thing moving in front of you. And I went to a talk earlier today, and he kept hitting the screen and moving it. It was like, stop it. Can't do that. Sorry. Always start and end with a thank you. And I blew my own delivery. I didn't say thank you for coming when I first started. Always end early and never run over. Learned that from a very high-up professional. There's a timer on that screen. It tells me how long I'm talking. I know how much time I have. Therefore, I must end before that time runs out. Because if I run over, you get upset. Especially faculty with students. Nothing makes a student more upset than you running over. And I know they leave early sometimes, but there's no running over. And then dress appropriately. I've seen people give talks in knotted up t-shirts and gym shorts. And no. You wear something appropriate. Whatever the audience is, whatever you decide, it needs to be appropriate. You don't need a suit. But you definitely don't want to use a t-shirt either. Group meeting, t-shirts are great. Professional talks, no way. Then at the end, tell everybody you're done. Right? People just drain off and dribble off. They forget to tell the audience, hey, I'm all done now. I'll take your questions now. And then, of course, as Robin indicated earlier, in this room, it's not as important. In a big room, you must repeat the question back to the audience. Because the person in the front row had the question, but the person in the back row had no idea what they said. Especially in a foreign, or if the person is a foreign language and having a hard time speaking English, it makes it even worse. So you need to repeat those questions. And then don't have a conversation with the person in the front row. They ask a question, you answer it, they ask another, and then no, everybody gets a chance to answer questions. You answer one of their questions, they have another one, you say, I'm sorry, I'm going to take that person back there. Mix it up, move it around, not just the person in the front. When you're talking about science, you need a conclusion. It has to conclude. You have to say, the reason you came here today was to learn about this stuff. The reason you were here was so interesting was this, this, and this. Some of the people fell asleep in the audience. They woke up at the end because they heard people grumbling around. You have to tell them what you went over today. Okay? There always is a conclusion at the end. I don't have a conclusion. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. I mean, the whole talk was a conclusion, I guess. There was one more thing I wanted to talk about. Maybe it'll come to me during questions. And then acknowledgments. Again, I don't have much to acknowledge. Thank you, Julie Mitchell, for inviting me to give a talk here to the Baxter Institute. Thank you, Biochemistry, for the last 19 years of work. People helped you get here. You didn't get here by yourself. People all around you helped you get here. Those people should be on that slide at the acknowledgments at the end. And then always thank your audience, of course. An effective last slide is your conclusion slide. So either repeat your conclusion slide after the acknowledgments or go back one slide. Because having your conclusions on screen while the audience is asking questions is very helpful for the audience because they can't remember everything you talked about. But if you back up and you show them everything you talked about while you're taking questions, they can say, oh yeah, I wanted to ask him a question about that first thing he talked about or the third thing he talked about. So it's always good to end on the conclusion slide or go back to your conclusion slide. Okay, I am done. Thank you for your attention. I will now take your questions if you have any. Yes?
So would you actually use this slide in a talk?
I would never. So would I actually use this slide in a talk? No, I would never use this slide in a talk. There's way too much stuff on it, way too many words. I could organize a talk around this and just give you 1, 2, 3, and then later on give you 4, 5, 6. So you could do it as an outline talk. As I said earlier, certain people in the audience hate seeing the outline, and other people love seeing the outline. It's just the way we think. People think differently. So some people need that outline to hang the story on, And other people, it gets in their way. They just want you to keep going. I'm a time limit. I know what you're talking about. Just keep moving forward. So it depends on your audience. Oh, I know what I want to talk to you about. Ah and The more nervous you are, the more you say ah and And the reason you say ah and I say okay. That's my problem. And I stopped saying okay after I was recorded the first time, and I saw myself say okay 9 million times during the talk, and I said, I'm never going to say okay again. People say ah and are okay when there's supposed to be a mental pause. If you find yourself saying ah and shut your mouth. Don't say ah and just close your mouth. Don't say anything. The reason you're saying ah and is you're trying to think of the next thing. The audience is trying to process what you just said. Shut your mouth, give them silence, let them process, let you process, then move to the next thing. If you think about that while you're practicing or giving your talk, you'll stop saying ah and or okay in my point. Any other questions? Yes?
I saw another talk once. There was an artist who was doing a lot of scientific illustrations, and he was showing, I forget the artist's work, but he was talking about the use of different colors to bring things out to the audience, and not kind of the hot and cold color concept. So what's your take on?
So what colors can you use to direct the audience? That's a whole other talk, actually. But dark colors will send things into the screen, and bright, shiny colors or light colors will bring them forward in the screen. So if you want to focus people's attention, minimize all the color, and just put spots of color where you need to focus someone. If you want someone to look right here in the slide, the whole slide's black and white except that's red, they will be zeroed in. They will not be able to look anywhere else but that one spot. So use the color to move them around the screen. But yeah, dark colors will minimize. Where I showed in the beginning gray text, it was grayed out. That minimizes it. Your brain says, oh, I don't need to take care of that right now. I only need to look at the black stuff.
Now, would you ever use say a lot of text on a slide like this, and there's one main point you want everybody to remember from this whole slide. Would you ever put it as red text?
Yeah, but I would never put this much text there, right? You understand? So minimize as much text, and then yes, you could put it in red. This is what I want you to remember when you walk out the door, is this one piece of red that's on the screen. Yes?
I'm going to comment more on the question. I was told that when you have slides, it's a good idea to introduce your slide before you switch to it. So when you're done with a slide, you start introducing the next slide before showing it, because as soon as you show your slide, people are going to try to process it and start listening to it.
You are exactly right. Whenever you give a talk, you want to introduce your next, excuse me, you want to introduce your next slide from the slide you're on now. So you talk about what's on the screen, and then you start talking about what's on the next slide. And it leads the audience to start thinking about what's on the next slide. And then when you click, it brings the two together and they marry. It's the ideal way to give a talk.
I guess which one the speaker thing on the computer that shows you the difference, like
what slides?
The next slides.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes. Okay.
Well, yeah, no, I highly recommend you use presenter tools so you can see what's coming up and what was previous. But when you lay out your talk in a logical order, lay it out and then leave a clue on the previous slide about what your next slide is, or use the presenter tools, and always introduce your next slide from the previous slide. That's a great point, yes. Yeah. Yes?
So it says keep it simple, only one story per talk.
Yes.
Do you have some tips for figuring out what your story is?
Well, and we've all been there. You can't talk about more than one thing. That's it. The audience can't comprehend more than one thing. And people do it all the time. They're like, well, I'm going to tell you about 6 different things. And it's like, you can tell me about 6 different things, but I'm only going to walk away with one. I'm not going to keep it all in my head. So you have to say, I have 12 minutes, I have 20 minutes, or I have 50 minutes, depending on where your audience is. What can I accomplish in that? And how, if I have 50 minutes, I can obviously talk about one thing in depth, more in depth than 12 minutes or 15 minutes. So you can layer it up, you can give them more history, you can make a broader talk out of it, but it's still only one topic. And if the requirement is you must talk about more, then you change the requirements. I'm serious. You talk about one thing, because that's all your audience can get. That's it. Yes, you have to look at your research and say, what's the one point I want to make? Right? There's one thing above everything else that I want to make today, and that's what you focus your whole talk on. You cannot cram it all in there. I've helped faculty get around that by bringing up a big introductory slide that shows everything they do in their labs. And so for the first 30 seconds, they say, I do this, I do this, we do this, we do this, we do this in the lab. This is all the fascinating stuff we're working on. Click. One thing stays on the screen, everything else fades away. Today, I'm going to talk to you about this thing right here. And so the audience goes, wow, they're diverse, they do all kinds of things. Okay, today I only have to worry about this. Whew, I'm off the hook. You let the audience off the hook. It's always good to let the audience off the hook. Never have them worried. Because if they're worried, then that's not good. So, yes?
So my thesis is about 3 different things.
Yeah, that's tough. Thesis defenses are very difficult. So are prelims.
So, but I can only give it in one time.
You have to figure out a way to frame it in the fact that I was here for 6 years, or however long it was, and this is what I accomplished in that time. And I don't know exactly what you accomplished, but I would try to say, out of all the stuff that I tried to do, this was the major thing that I did. You know, I did do all this other stuff, but the major thing I did was this, and I'm going to spend the most time talking about that. Minimize the other things, mention them, but minimize them, and take the major accomplishment and work on that. If you have a major accomplishment, then that's easy to do.
I hope to have 3 major.
Then,
No, so I mean, I've written lots of thesis defense. The difference there is that presumably the committee has read the thesis.
yes.
Right? So you can talk about just one thing, right?
But do they usually read the thesis?
Well, yeah, you do look at it, right? You know, in detail, no, right? But I mean, and if they didn't, they won't know you did 3 things, and then it doesn't matter. Just talk about one thing.
That's
Right?
true.
So in both situations, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to pass or fail you given if you say 3 stories or 1 story.
Generally, for a thesis, if your faculty comes to you and says, you're done, it's time for you to graduate, you've already done it. You're already done. If the faculty comes to you and says, it's time, move on, you're done, you're done. Right? You've already almost passed because they've already done it. That's generally the way it works. Yes?
So I went to the, I think it's a Steinberg or biochemistry lecture yesterday.
Yeah, Monday lectures, yeah.
The Monday one. And so I thought he gave a really good talk, and he's obviously kind of high caliber, high profile scientist. But, so it was all about this one receptor, but I mean, this must have been like 20 years of work that he had done on this.
Wow.
And the talk was about 15 different experiments. So, I mean, what is your commentary on that? Yes, it was about one thing, but I mean, you had to kind of, unless you were...
It's too much.
Yeah.
There's way too much detail. Yeah.
That was kind of my thinking as well, but at the same time, you know, he did have an audience that was very into, you know, they knew what he was doing, but it was a lot of stuff. So
When you have that much detail to go through, you can't go through it in detail. You have to tell the audience, I did all this work. I mean, you're up here, you're the expert, right? They're there because they believe you did all that work. You're not going to come up here and present a lie. So you don't need to go through all that detail. You can say, we did this experiment that was framed around this, and this was our conclusion. And that led us to this next experiment, which was framed around this, and led us to this conclusion. Show them the results if you want. You know, you can see these bands matched up. These bands did not match up. Boom, down to the next one. So you can breeze through all of that stuff to lead to the project, to say, this is what we concluded, this is why we think this happens, and all that. I would definitely say minimize all that detail. They can ask questions about it. Your research papers are all there. They can go read it if they want. So, yes?
Do you have a rule of thumb of how many slides, or is it 45 minutes?
It depends on the talk, yeah. How many slides per talk, yeah. If you're giving a 12-minute talk and you know your research really well, you can probably get through 12 slides, 1 a minute. The background slides, if they're very simple and easy to understand, you can go through them very quickly and then focus on the main slides. But I can go through 80 slides in 50 minutes and you won't know at all. You won't even know I went through 80 slides. So it depends on what you're talking about and how interesting it is to the audience. If it's dry, boring, dull stuff, and I go through 80 slides, not going to work, because I'm going to have to go through them really quick. You have as many slides as that are appropriate. It's like the text size. What's the appropriate size text? I don't know, whatever.
I think you should have as few slides as are appropriate.
You should have, yeah, exactly, as few slides as appropriate, yeah. Never have extra slides. But that's why you practice in front of the two groups, because they're going to say, wow, that was really not necessary. I don't think you need to go into that part. That's what the science-related people are going to tell you, hopefully. Hopefully your PI is going to say, that's really nice, but let's not focus on that today. Let's talk about this. Yes?
So this is in regards to your comment on kind of using the notes within PowerPoint and Keynote.
Yeah.
So I can see that being effective in cases where you're actually bringing your laptop and you're plugging in.
Yes.
I've been to conferences where you have to show up early and upload your presentation so that there's no laptop to laptop variability.
Right.
You know, basically it's this time your slides are up.
Most of the big talks you go talk, most of the big symposiums you talk at, you bring your talk on a flash drive or a CD and they take it and take care of it. You can always have paper notes in front of you. That always works. The 3x5 cards aren't very effective. I think an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper is nice because it has your main points on it and you know when they come up in the talk and you just remember to mentally check them off. You can talk to the people at the symposium ahead of time and say, are you going to use presenter notes? Are you going to allow us to see what's on the screen? Are you going to, and a lot of times they'll be, well, in the old days they were like, what are presenter notes? But now everybody knows what they are. Who run these things better know what they are. And they'll turn them on for you, usually. Generally they're on by default now. So just ask ahead of time. What's really hard is when you use Keynote and you go and they say, no, it's PowerPoint only.
I can see that being stressful if you prep for weeks and all of a sudden you fly into a conference and you go the day before and then all of a sudden you're really reliant on your notes.
Yes, and they're gone.
And you realize, no, that's not going to work.
That's why you call ahead and find out, and if they say no, then you have paper notes in front of you. So it's perfectly okay to shift papers on the podium. I would recommend never touching a podium, getting away from a podium and memorizing your talk. That's what I would do. Podiums are the worst thing in the world. Hiding behind a podium, holding a podium, get rid of the podium and move around, interact. The best speakers, if you go to a lot of talks, the best speakers are the ones who walk around and interact with their audience. They have the most memorable talks. You learn the most from them. Yes?
So I see that you're using a Macintosh.
Yeah.
Have you ever been at talks where suddenly like the color red disappears?
If you lose a color like that, it's the connector. It's the pin. There's 15 pins in the VGA port, and one of them is bent. We've done tech support, Robin too, done tech support for years, and it's always the pin is bent.
Yeah, I saw there was a faculty who was coming for their job talk.
Yeah.
And they're trying to show these, images of salmonella cells invading the human host, and she's like, watch the red cells, and everybody's looking, what are you talking about?
The whole channel's gone, yes.
And she said, she solved it. She said, oh yeah, it got underneath, look at the cord.
Yeah, exactly. These cords get used over and over and over again, and right here especially they end up breaking. So the wires get really worn and they end up breaking, and so that's all it is. You just need a new cord. It's always wise to carry a VGA cord with you so that you don't have that problem. You can just use your own VGA cord. They're dirt cheap. If you go to your computing people, they'll have 100 of them in the closet. They'll give you one. I've used Mac and PCs for years, and to me there's no contest between the two. It's Mac all the way. There's no reason to use a PC, I'm sorry. They're annoying to me. So there's too much to do. I just want to work. I get on the computer, I want to work. I don't want to deal with anything else. I want to do work. So, not work on the machine. I want to work on the programs. Any other questions? Okay, with that, I'll conclude. Say thank you for your attention.